My name is Sebastian, and I'm an architect with Stitch Design Shop. When I first got interested in architecture, I believe I was in probably the 6th or 7th grade, and I was always really interested in art as a kid. I loved to draw. I loved to make things with my hands. I would always build forts in the backyard. And so I think that curiosity of taking art and transforming it into something that was three-dimensional, something that could be built, I was always interested in and really gravitated towards. And my art teacher, I believe it was the 7th grade, introduced me to what architecture was. And from that point on, I was intrigued by what architects did and how they could take drawings and really create what buildings ultimately look like. And so at that point on, I started sketching buildings, making little physical models. I made one of my own house and made one of a house that I had drawn the floor plan of. And so I think that interest and that passion started around my middle school years, and was fortunate enough to go to the School of Design at NC State, where I was able to pursue that passion. But it was there that I really got introduced to modernism and kind of modernist thinking, and it was like a light bulb went off for me, because I came from a pretty traditional background growing up in Louisville, North Carolina, which is just on the other side of Winston-Salem, where, which is where our office is. It was very rural, and all the architecture around me was brick. Most of the houses all kind of looked the same. It didn't have a whole lot of character. And when I got to NC State, I realized that there was so much more than the architecture that I was used to seeing. And so I really credit the professors at NC State and the teaching there that really opened my eyes to what modern architecture is and what it means to me. And that has really had a profound impact on my practice and the type of architecture that I'm gravitated towards and the type of architecture that I ultimately like to create. And so after graduating from the School of Design, I worked for about 10 years for a firm in Winston-Salem. I wasn't really getting the type of project that I had yearned for when I was in school, and I think a lot of young designers and young architects have that same frustration. And so I met Pete and Ben, my two partners here at Stitch, about 2013, and we started the conversations of, what would it look like if the three of us who all share the same sort of interest in modern architecture, what would it look like if we joined forces and kind of started our own design shop? And so those early conversations kept snowballing and snowballing and snowballing to where we eventually started a Stitch Design Shop, and that was in 2014. And since then, we've been able to create about a dozen modern homes that really range in size, they range in budget, and it's just been a very rewarding experience to get to actually practice with modern residential. And we've been fortunate to meet about a dozen clients that share that passion and share that interest, and so we just naturally want to work for them and create something special for them. And modern residential, more so than probably any other project type, the relationship with the client is really intense, and it's different than it is with our commercial clients, because at the end of the day, this is their home, this is their biggest investment. It's the biggest investment most people ever make in their life. So there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears involved in the process of designing a home, both for the architect and for the owner. So we've been real fortunate that those relationships have been real strong, and I think the byproduct of that are the homes that we've been able to create for them. And we get a lot of gratification out of that. I mean, it kind of takes me back to when I was in my middle school years and creating physical models and really seeing the end result of a lot of hard work. It's tangible, you can see it, you can touch it, you can experience it. And seeing our clients watch their home get constructed and it look like the drawings we drew or the renderings that we created, and seeing the look on their face when they walk into the space for the first time, seeing the look on their kid's face when they walk into their room for the first time is very rewarding, and it's something that our design firm doesn't ever want to lose. We try and make a point to at least do a house or two a year because we get so much out of it, more personally than we do professionally, because it is a very rewarding experience. And we've been fortunate enough to kind of parlay that into our commercial work. And so as our firm has grown, where we started doing modern residential homes, which started with, I guess, my home back in 2009, the whole one residence that I built and designed. From there, the chronological order roughly goes house, 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 a couple park projects, a couple houses, and then the commercial work started coming in. And in the past 2 years, from roughly 2016 to 2017, about 90% of our workload has been commercial projects, which it's been a lot of fun for us, but we still find a way to carve out time for a modern home here or there. It's a way for us to kind of get back to our roots as a design firm, because you don't ever kind of want to forget where you came from. And I think going in the future, we will always strive to do houses here and there. As our company has grown, we're doing more park projects, we're doing more civic projects, we're doing larger scale projects, which is also equally rewarding because it allows us to practice different project types. And that's something that we're interested in. Our start and our original passion, and will always continue to be our passion, has always been modern residential. And we're just lucky enough that the three of us met and we were able to kind of form a company around that desire to see people get to live in a modern home, because it's a really cool thing to see. The biggest change that I've noticed with modernist architecture since I was first introduced to it has probably been the evolution of interest. So when I first got introduced, it wasn't very common in my circle of friends. It wasn't very common in my family. It wasn't very common in the books that I read or the things that I looked at. As I've been involved with architecture, and more importantly modernist architecture, I think the overall interest has increased tremendously since the late 1990s to now. And I think a lot of that is due in part to society just demanding a different look, both in residential and in commercial. And I think that's influenced by many things. I think it's influenced by the film industry, whether you see a movie and it goes back to the James Bond movies, where the house that James Bond is in, or any character for that matter that is typically in a modernist home. Usually it's the villain, but in other cases it's sometimes the good guy is in the different house. Even to car commercials, the cars that we drive are very modern and clean in their design, but yet everyone parks those modern cars in a very traditional garage and goes into their very traditional house. And I think as people become more aware of just the fact that a lot of their devices and their cars and their computers and their smartphones are very modern in their design, why can't their home be that same way? And so you see that in automobile commercials where the car pulls up, it's usually in front of a modern house. That's a great indicator. So I think as other products around us are more modern, I've seen the change go to where people also want their home to be modern. It's an extension of that. And that's probably the biggest thing that I've noticed since I was first introduced, is just the yearning for homes to now be modern. And that's been great to be a part of, and it's been great to see. Oftentimes we have clients that will ask us, what defines a modernist home, or what does modern architecture look like? How is it defined? And pretty quickly we start by saying it has to do with the site. So in many ways, when you see a modernist home in this example, it's very site specific. The way it sits on the land, you can tell it's been thought about. You can tell that the architect has thought about which way the sun rises. Where is the prevailing winds coming from? Where do you want to be in the morning when you're having your cup of coffee? Where do you want to be in the evening when you're eating your dinner? And how do you want the light to come in? What views do you want to capture? And so modernist architecture is very rooted around placing buildings and elements of the building on the site in a very specific manner. In conjunction to that, the material palette that is many times associated with a modernist home is typically one that has stone, concrete, steel, glass. And so it's the marriage of those, for the most part, natural materials that helps blend the architecture into the site. So it almost becomes seamless. You see that in the material palette in a modernist house. Also, typically the forms of the homes are very clean, large, expansive windows of glass, but roof forms that start to delineate between what is top of house and really what is top of roof. And so typically you'll see that blend happen with a flat roof or a low pitched roof or a butterfly roof. And so the roof form starts to take on a form of its own that is not your standard hipped or gabled roof that you're used to seeing in traditional architecture. So the roof form really starts to delineate a modernist house from a traditional house. That in conjunction with large expansive windows, site-specific orientation, and a material palette that's very well rooted in natural materials are pretty much the indicators that you would see when you're seeing a modern home. Some of the challenges that I think we face as modernist architects is the perception that sometimes modern architecture is perhaps more expensive, or it's going to somehow offend your neighbor, or even as the architect, we kind of worry that we're going to offend our client, that we're going to show them something that is perhaps not the norm. And contrary to that, what we found is that those challenges ultimately become some of the greatest rewards. Because when you see a client that is used to something that's more traditional, and you've presented a modern concept to them, you see their eyes kind of open up to something new. And the ultimate reward is when you actually are able to take that modern design that you once thought had to be traditional and get it built. And the owners see firsthand how that modern design has affected he or she personally, but more importantly has affected their employees, and how they were able to create an environment that their employees appreciated more, the work retention is higher. And the same thing goes for modern residential, from a traditional home into a modern home. The challenge is that, wow, what if they don't like it? We've fortunately have not experienced that with any of our clients. When they move in, it's like, wow, why haven't we been doing this all along? And a lot of what we've done at Stitch is take the risk to put the modern design in front of a client that might not be expecting it. That is always a challenge when we're faced with a new project. How far can we push the design? How far can we push our client? How far can we push modern architecture? And so one of the challenges in our studio that we face almost on a daily basis is, as we're pursuing modern design in our studio, is the challenge to not replicate what we've already done. And that happens both on residential projects and on commercial projects. And that's something easier said than done, because in many ways, when you see a modern design, the lines and the shapes and the forms are all somewhat identifiable. And so when you've done a dozen of those, how do you make the next design different, but yet still be rooted in modern tendencies and modern style? But it's also an opportunity to really challenge ourselves to think differently. And in many ways that happens with each client, because each client is different, each house is different, each need is different. And so that's an opportunity for us to challenge how we might make that look, or how we might make that feel. And so that's an ongoing struggle that I think any designer has, is that they don't want the product that they create to kind of become stagnant. They don't want it necessary to become so identifiable or replicated. That's something we strive for. We don't want a project to be duplicated. That's hard to do, especially when you've got a client that wants the same thing as the other client wanted. And so how do you create a house that is the same square footage, same number of bedrooms, and they want it to look exactly like the first one? How do you still deliver a product that is unique to them, unique to the site. If I could provide some advice to whether it's a student or anyone that's following a creative passion, find what fulfills you the most and find what makes you the happiest, what gives you that drive to get up in the morning and to work late at night. And what is that thing that just gets you excited? Many people refer to that as what are you most passionate about. So I would say exactly that. Find what it is that you're most passionate about and pursue it to the furthest degree that you can. And I think what you'll find is that you're not compromising with yourself to conform to a job or a lifestyle that's not what you want. You're truly following a path that's ingrained. If you have that drive and you have that desire, then you need to pursue it. Know in your heart that you're doing the right thing. Even when you've got people saying that, well, you should go to law school or you should go to medical school. If you still like to tinker around and sketch in your sketch pad and you find yourself doing that in your downtime, I think that's your brain telling you that you really want to be creating something. You really want to be the person that's coming up with ideas. You really want to be that person that's imagining what's possible. And you can do that in many other careers. What I've found is when that spark went off in middle school, it was wow, that's something that I'm 100% on board with. Architecture is so interesting that I wanted to be a part of my life. And once I understood that, it made sense to me that I was, following my passion.